This is Mary. Welcome to the IHC Craft Room.
In today's video, I'm going to show you how I made this beautiful dot painted vase for Mother's Day. I'll show you all the steps that you need so that you can make one just like it for your mom. So grab all your stuff and let's get crafty.
For materials, we'll begin with a 7-inch glass vase that I picked up at the dollar store. I think it's 7 inches. It's hard to measure vases, guys. Next, we're going to need some multi-surface acrylic paint in a variety of colors, and I've chosen black, white, and radiant gold. For tools, we'll be using some paper towels, my dotting tools, of course, a paint palette, painter's tape, some rubbing alcohol, Q-tips, toothpicks, some felt, and a wet rag. Anytime I'm working with a glass surface, I always begin by cleaning it off with rubbing alcohol to remove finger oils and any other debris that might be stuck to the surface. That way, our paint will adhere better to it. The last thing we need to do before we can get started on dotting is add a piece of felt or paper or something to the inside of this vase to help you see what you're doing, or else it's going to be very hard to see what you're laying on the glass surface. Let's begin by eyeballing the center of the vase. Take a deep breath, let it out, and place your center dot using gold paint and the 13.0 rod. You'll notice I use a dotting tool to smooth out my dot. This is because I'll be adding a top dot to this later and I need a smooth surface for that. Next, we'll be using some white paint and our 2.0 millimeter pink stylus to add a little trim around the center dot. The key here is to take your time and to refill your stylus with paint between each dot. That's how you'll maintain the same size dot across your entire trim. And always remember to leave yourself enough space that you're not going to butt up against your last dot, because they will melt together and become a huge blob, which is no bueno, my friends. For the first row of our design, we're going to be using the 2.5 white stylus and some black paint to create another row mimicking the trim we just completed. I'm not trying to line up these dots with the dots from the previous row or do anything other than make sure that my dots are close together and the same size. For our second row, we'll stick with black paint and switch to the 3mm green stylus. Since I don't have any guidelines to direct me here, I'm going to be using a cross pattern to keep my dots somewhat symmetrical and well spaced. I'll then go back in and fill in the spot in between. It's always easier to divide in half when you have a dot on each side. It makes it easier to center. Let's take some white paint and the 6.0 rod, and we're going to put a nice sized white dot just over top of the black dots we just laid down, making sure not to touch them. I'm going to slow this down here. You'll notice that I don't like the dot I just made, so I'm going to wipe it away, clean up the area, and try again. That's dot painting. We're going to add some accent micro dots to the first row using the 0.8mm yellow stylus and gold paint. In between each dot of the first row, we're going to add 2 micro dots. I usually wait to add accent dots and top dots until the first layer of the pattern is totally done and dry. In this case, however, because I'm working on a glass surface that's rounded and I just really don't want to tempt fate. I'm really scared that if I don't get these accent dots done now, that when I build out this pattern further, I'm totally not going to have the opportunity to do it without messing things up. So we're going to do it now. Once that's done, we're going to use the same stylus and the same gold paint, and we're going to do pretty much the same thing, which is we're going to dot all the way around every one of these white dots that we placed in row 1. The focus here is to keep these dots small and as close to the same size as possible. And we're going to do that by regulating the amount of paint we have on our stylus. Last, we want to always keep track of how close we place each dot next to each other. Okay, you get the point. Let's skip ahead to the next step in the pattern. For the next part, we're going to be using a technique called walking the dots. We'll begin with our 1mm blue stylus and some black paint. I'm going to flip over the stylus and use the bigger side to place 1 dot at the top centermost point. Then I'll flip over the stylus using the 1mm side. I'll lay down 5 equal sized dots, and then I'll add a decent amount of paint to my stylus, and then without adding any more paint or stopping, I'm going to place several dots in a row. As the paint dwindles out on my stylus, the dots will naturally get smaller and smaller, ending in some nearly non-existent micro dots. I'm going to repeat that process on the other side. I'll add some more paint to my stylus and then walk the dots until the paint runs out and we have a pretty little pattern in its place. Before we expand this pattern any further, I want to go and add a top dot to my center dot using the 8.0 white rod and black paint. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's get back to our walking the dots. I'm going to do another row of walk the dots, but we're going to increase the size slightly. I'm going to be using my 2mm pink stylus, but in this case, we're going to kind of do the opposite in terms of how to use the stylus itself. We'll begin by placing a 2mm black dot at the very top. Then flipping the stylus over, we'll use the smaller side, which I believe is a 1.25mm. And we'll start by placing 5 equal sized dots down before filling the stylus with paint again, and then proceeding to dot in a row until the paint runs out and we've completed our walk the dot pattern. For this second row of walking the dots, we have the added challenge of spacing. The second row of walk the dots is filling this space to capacity. So what do you do when the dots don't all fit? Do you overlap them? Not me. I don't like overlapping dots, and I don't like squishing dots together, so my rule is simple. If a dot doesn't fit, don't put one there. Just skip it. The pattern will look beautiful regardless of one less dot. Trust me. Before we move on to our second round of petals, I'd like to get some top dots added to the large white dots from our third row. Using the 3mm green stylus and radiant gold paint, I'm going to drop a small gold dot in the center of each of the large white dots. All right, we're ready to move on to the next section of our pattern. Using the 3mm green stylus and black paint, we're going to drop a small dot in between the petals from the previous row. What comes next, friends? That's right, a big white dot. Using the 6.0 rod and white paint, we're going to add a white dot just over top of the black ones, making sure not to touch them and keeping everything as centered as possible. Next, we're going to add that gold trim around these big white dots to really make them pop. We'll be using the 0.8mm yellow stylus and gold paint to make that happen. You remember how to do this, right? Let's skip ahead to the next step. Actually, hold on, pump the brakes. I want to show you something. This is what happens when you get distracted while you're working on a dot painting and you don't pay attention to where you're placing your hand because you're so focused on where to place your dot. I managed to place my hand smack dab on top of some wet paint and destroyed what I had just done. I tried to fix it by adding fresh paint on top, but the dot was just too dry for that, so there was no saving it. So what do we do now? Smash the vase, flip the table, and light the house on fire? Who can afford that? Not me. I guess we'll have to fix it with some Q-tips and patience then. That definitely doesn't sound as fun, just for the record. Okay, now that we've corrected that mistake and finished our gold trim, let's move on to the first round of walking the dots. We're going to do the same thing we did before, using the 1mm blue stylus and black paint. We'll begin by using the bigger side of the stylus to drop a dot at the very top. Then flip over the stylus, fill it with paint, and we'll add 5 equal sized dots before refilling our stylus with paint one more time and walking the dots down to a micro dot finish. Once that round is done, we're going to move on to the second row of walking the dots. Remember, we're increasing the size on this row, so we'll be using the 2mm pink stylus tool and black paint to accomplish that. We'll start off by putting a 2mm dot at the very top and then flipping the stylus over, loading it with paint and placing 5 equal sized dots before loading it with paint again and then walking the dots down to a micro finish. We're going to keep doing that until this whole pattern has bloomed and blossomed before our eyes, and before you know it, we'll be focused on finishing touches. The last step is to add our final bit of top dots to this design. We're going to be using the 3mm green stylus for all of these top dots. We'll start with some white paint for our center top dot, and then switch over to gold paint to add a small dot in the center of all of the remaining large white dots to complete our pattern. And there you have it. Our dotted vase for Mother's Day is finished. How do you like it? Isn't it gorgeous? I bet my mom would have really loved it. I'll just have to enjoy it for her. If you're lucky enough to still have your mother, give her a hug from you and me this year, okay? Thank you for joining me on this shiny glass, mandala-inspired, black, gold, and white dotted vase that probably is 7 inches tall Mother's Day gift-making extravaganza. Madonna, that was a long sentence, wasn't it? If you enjoyed this tutorial, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so that we can continue to get crafty together. Toodaloo!